I've got a huge soft spot for all things artisan and handcrafted, whether we're talking about furniture, Italian cheese, or guitar amps. And so my eyes lit up when I first saw the Analoguetube AT-101, but of course my big question is, does it really even make sense to think about a compressor that's 11,500 British pounds, or at the time of shooting this, close to 17,000 US dollars. So I got my hands on one to find out. I'm a big fan of the show Top Gear on BBC, and I always watch that show and think, man, those guys are so lucky as they're getting to hop into a Bugatti Veyron and drive it around. And as the US rep from Analoguetube was loading the AT-101 into my studio, I kind of thought, I got that gig too. It's just in the world of audio. The AT-101 is designed as a faithful recreation of the Fairchild 670, and to understand the AT-101 it's good to know a little bit about the Fairchild 670. And the Fairchild is a classic vintage compressor, tube compressor, used extensively on records by the Beatles and many classic artists. And if you happen to find one in your uncle's garage, I'll buy it off you cheap. The Fairchild 670s on today's used market can go anywhere between 20 and 30,000 US dollars. So pretty good if you happen to find one. But the compression ratio actually changes depending on how much gain reduction it's doing. So basically the harder you hit it, the higher the ratio gets on the compressor. You'll find on some other compressors like the Manley VariMu, which is variable mu compression, is a similar thing. Also I've got Signal Audio Workshop Gain Rider, which is another variable mu type compressor. It's a really nice thing. I'm not smart enough to tell you the electronics behind it, but they tend to be very beautiful, musical sounding kind of compressors. And in full disclosure, I've never actually used a real Fairchild 670, despite the fact of making hundreds of records and doing this for 20 years around the world. So the AT-101 in this review is just going to have to stand on its own merit. The one thing I will tell you though, as a comparison to the Fairchild 670, if you're looking at the AT-101 as a just straight substitute for it, the first thing you'll notice is there's no vert-lat control. And the vert-lat control is actually a basically summing matrix designed for cutting lathes when you're cutting to vinyl. It's a way to control sort of the side and the middle controls independently, and they've opted not to include that on the AT-101. I've actually got a very similar thing like on one of my other hardware units that I don't really find myself using very often, so that really wasn't a big disappointment to me. But now, the AT-101 on its own terms. I'll give you a quick run through of what it is. It is a big mountain of tubes and transformers, and it's beautifully crafted, all point-to-point, hand-wired. There are no printed circuit boards in it, and really the craftsmanship and the care that's gone into this thing is just exquisite. Really, everything about it really screams just beautiful care and quality. When you pull it open and take a look at the insides, you just can't help but notice how beautifully this is put together and how much care has obviously gone into it. In terms of the controls, you've got a stereo link, so this is dual mono, and this is stereo linked. But none of the controls are shared. So if you're trying to use stereo program material like a drum bus or a stereo mix, you're going to want to set both of these controls matched independently if you're trying to go for just true matched stereo. It's not like some other newer units where you can actually just set both sides with one set of controls. There's some pretty extensive metering options that in reality I just find myself not playing with too much. You don't really need meters that much for your compressors, but if you want to dig into it, go to their website and they'll tell you more about the different metering options. It's got a left input and a right input gain, so you're driving a gain stage at the beginning. What I really like about the AT-101 is, as a Varimu compressor, is that these are totally independent controls. If you look at the Manley Varimu or the Signal Audio Workshop Gain Rider, they actually share a common input gain control, which is great when you're doing mastering applications or your stereo 2-bus, but if you're trying to run it independently, is you know, putting one channel on your guitars, another on your bass, in a mix or tracking session, that can actually be a little bit limiting. So I really like the fact that these are completely independent, but they're also on stepped attenuators, and I think they're 1 dB stepped attenuators. So it's very easy if you want to match that specifically. You've got a threshold control, no big surprises there. And the one thing that you may not be used to is, you'll notice there are not independent attack and release controls. You just have this one setting here of time constants. And what the time constants is, again inspired by the old Fairchild 670, is the attack and release times are actually part of the design. Again, that's not the end of the world. A LA2A does not have independent attack and release times, and that doesn't stop that from being one of the coolest compressors ever made. But what they've done is the attack times are programmed in, and they're all very, very quick. The attack times are going from, I think, about 0.2 milliseconds to 0.8 milliseconds, so pretty quick, very enough to clamp down on drums and vocals and things like that. And in my experience with the unit, I found attack times to be very, very usable on this. And where things really start to change up is in the release times. 1 and 2 are very quick release times. They're so really from 3 on, you're dealing with some pretty long release times. And I can tell you, just in my own time playing around with the unit for my own taste and way of working, I spent almost all of my time with time constants 1 and 2. So all this history stuff and what the unit looks like and how nice these switches feel, that's all good and well, but at the end of the day, we really care about one thing. How does this thing sound? So I got a chance to play with it for a few days, and the first day my friend Bruno Fernazza, who is a great producer, was in town, and he came by and we ran a bunch of stuff together through it and played around with it. And I guess I can sum it up this way: the words beautiful and gorgeous kept coming out of our mouth. We put it on some drums, we put it on guitars, on vocals, and you know, you can talk about transient response and you know, depth and all of that, but the funny thing was, we just kept saying, oh my God, this is gorgeous. Wow, that's a beautiful sound. Wow, listen to that. So really, you know, without being technical, beautiful and gorgeous pretty much sums up this box. It really is a tone machine, and I'd heard a few people that have played with this before describe this as a nice transparent box. In my opinion, not at all correct. This is not a box you run audio through if you want it to come out exactly the same. You know, if you're looking for that kind of box, you know, George Massenburg compressors are great. I mean, the A-Design's Nail is really incredible for that, really just clean and transparent. The AT-101 brings something to the party just by running audio through it in a very significant way. And not to say that this is distortion, it's a really kind of unique sound. It's not going to be the overdriven or the saturation you might get from a vintage Neve. What it does is it just makes the mid-range and the low mids just big, solid, and beautiful in a way that almost no other unit I've ever had a chance to play with does. So the tone we kept hearing, we really just kept focusing on the low mids and the low end. It created this just big, warm, solid, fat, beautiful kind of low end and low mid range that I really haven't experienced with other units, and something very different than I could get with even my best best equalizers. It's a completely different thing, and you know, I can really only assume that has to do with all the tube stages and the giant transformers in the back. It really is just this kind of beautiful thing. If I could levy any kind of small negative about the tone, is it does have a tendency to soften the high end just a bit, which could be very ideal, especially for maybe a harsh digital style recording. But I don't say that it really is a huge negative, because it's the kind of thing where putting one of my EQs that's really good about tweaking up the high end, just a little hint of that could bring that back without any problem. So it really wasn't damaging the high end, but I just found that it softened it just a hair, but in a way that a nice equalizer could easily bring that back and open it up. And really just what it did to the lows and the low mids was kind of worth the trade-off, if that is indeed a trade-off. So when it comes to the compression circuit, how does this deal with dynamic program material and things like that? It's quite cool. I really found myself the real sweet spot of this unit being anywhere from about 1 to 5 dB of gain reduction. And the one thing that I found is I enjoyed the tonal aspects of this more when I was running more dynamic content through it. So if I had a really dynamic mix that had not had any 2-bus compression on it, I enjoyed what this did to the tone more than if I had taken like a hard rock mix that had already been smacked pretty hard and put it through. It certainly didn't have any problems with that less dynamic mix at all, but just totally subjectively I found that if I had a real punchy dynamic mix or drum recording, that the tone kept putting bigger smiles on my face than when I was running something already a little bit flat. But I would still have no problem running through this with something less dynamic just to get this beautiful tone out of it. So that's really the great thing, and where I think this will find its place with a lot of units, or I'm sorry, in a lot of studios, is it's just such a beautiful tone machine, and the fact that you're using it doesn't take away anything else that you've got. So if you want to run things through this just to get the tone, and then you can use your other compressors in the hardware or software world if you want to be able to have more controlled manipulation of the dynamic range of the envelopes of it. So now back to our original question. Could I ever justify spending this much money on a compressor? I have to tell you, when I first started the show and first started testing it, I was kind of on the fence, kind of two different concepts. One is I was hoping I absolutely love this unit because having an incredible, beautiful piece of equipment that I love probably makes for a better, more interesting show, and certainly one more fun to play around with and talk about. The other side is I was kind of hoping I didn't like it that much because, you know, if I didn't like it that much, there would be no void in my life that I didn't have one of these sitting next to me in my control room every day of my life. The bummer is, it's really that good. It really is a very special unit. There's something just fantastic about it. Again, I've made hundreds of records and I like almost all of them a lot, and they were made without this. But this really does bring something to the table that nothing else I own really does. And if you've got the money for this sort of thing, it really probably is worth taking a serious look at if you're a high-end mastering or mix room, or just have some money and, you know, can really shoot for the best. It really is worth trying out this unit and seeing if it is for you, because it really does do something to the tone that is just beautiful and unlike other things that I've used. The closest thing I could subjectively compare it to in my experience is there's a studio in Italy called Prostochimi Recording where I work out of a lot, and they've got an old Studer C37 tube tape machine, and there's sort of a roundness and a bigness in the low end that comes from that machine, and that's probably the only other unit I could think of that really kind of starts to do what this thing does. So sadly, I gotta say, if you got the money, it probably is seriously worth considering, because it's a very, very cool unit and really does bring something to your creative palette. I don't think I'm going to be buying one this week, but it's certainly going to get cataloged away in sort of my dream list. When Bruno and I were pumping stuff through this on the first day, I just recorded some things really quick, and I've posted them here online. So if you're watching this on somebody else's website or from the iTunes podcast store, you got to come back to ronansrecordingshow.com, and I think this is going to be episode 19. So ronansrecordingshow.com, episode 19. Just below this video there should be one or two links to a couple sound samples of processed and unprocessed things. I did them really quick, so you pull them into your DAW. You can spend more time level matching or doing any kind of comparisons that are helpful to you. And just so you know, in the comparison, what I did was I ran it out through a analog loop through the compressor, and then I also, the unprocessed files are also run through the analog loop, just so we could keep those as close as possible. And again, play with those, level match them, anything that could be helpful, and they really aren't going to be able to tell you the whole story, just because there's a lot of control in terms of how hard you push this thing, or don't push it in terms of the tone you could get. But we just had a couple fun samples that we threw up there for you. So take a listen. Hope you enjoy it, and again, thank you so much for tuning in, and make great music.